SC Media and our sponsor, Savient, are proud to present this month's CISO Stories program. This is the show where CISOs share tales from the trenches and unpack leadership lessons learned along the way. Find this month's CISO Stories content at CISOstoriespodcast.com. The Cyber Risk Collaborative is a unique membership community enabling cybersecurity leaders to work together in a trusted environment. To learn more, please visit CISOstoriespodcast.com/CRC. Greetings, everyone. Welcome back for another month's episode of CISO Stories Podcast. We got an awesome new guest here, soon to be my friend. I hope. Go get you out to my B-sides. John Heasman from Knoxville. What's up, John? How you doing today?
Doing good, Jess. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited. I enjoyed our conversation yesterday, our prep call, and I'll just real quick give a shout out to our Knoxville mutual friends, Matt and Andrew. I won't put their names out there because they're pen testers. They might kill me if I do that. But it's just such a small world, and you do so much in the community. Speaking, you mentioned Black Hat and at various B-sides, which is super awesome. Love that so much. Thank you for joining us today to talk about non-human identities. So let's set the tone. You have such a wealth of knowledge on this topic. What is non-human identities? What does that mean when we're talking about security?
Well, I mean, the clue's in the name, obviously. So we're not talking about logins that a human will use. We're talking about machine identities. We're talking about API keys, access tokens, essentially automated access that we set up to allow applications to interact with each other, that allow our integrations and our automation to function.
Yeah, and that's like, I think the balance of human to non-human, we're always going to have that human identity, but certainly we've been having non-human with, service accounts and so forth for many, many years now. What do you see the shift like now? Like, I feel like we've been talking about it, but there's more emphasis on non-human now. You mentioned yesterday some of the differences between non-human identities. Let's talk about that.
Right. Well, I mean, firstly, like you said, this isn't really a new problem, but the term non-human identity is a nice umbrella term for a few things. Things like service accounts, things like API keys. So we can actually I really like the term, so we can think about the problem more holistically and figure out how to secure these things. Frankly, right now, the situation with NHIs in most companies, it's a mess. There's a few reasons for that. I'd love to elaborate.
Yes, please.
Well, as a CISO, I really like to use mental models to help me with prioritization. I'm sure everyone does. So I like to think of NHIs in three categories, really. The first category, it's NHIs with what I'll call core software. So this is the major applications in a company that we either buy or perhaps we built. And these applications, by and large, are well maintained, well documented. And the associated NHIs with these things, if they're compromised, well, there's probably going to be a major impact. Then category two, these are the NHIs in what I'll call non-core software. So this includes things like legacy software. We obviously all have that. Automation, integrations, lambdas, and so forth. And these things, they may not be quite so well maintained or even in use anymore. They may not adhere to company standards around IAM or SDLC, and they may be lacking on documentation or folks in the company that kind of even know how they work. So that's category two. And then the final category of NHI, these are NHIs used by engineers, by DevOps, InfoSec, IT folks, things like GitHub personal access tokens used locally, for example, for one-off or time-bound tasks. And unfortunately, in a lot of cases, these NHIs don't get cleaned up. They live on beyond their need, and then they show up in scripts on laptops. They show up on file shares in random places in source control, and they can become a real problem too. So we've got these sort of three categories of NHI, and then I'd say on top of that, we've got just wild inconsistency around how NHIs how they operate and the capabilities of the applications that generate these NHIs. So is the NHI time bound, for example, or does it just not expire? Is it going to be valid forever? Is it scoped to specific permissions, or does it have like full high privileges? Does the underlying app even support scopes? Many don't. And then lastly, is the NHI, what form does it take? Is it like an API key, or is it an access token generated with something like OAuth2 or OIDC? So not only have we got those three categories of NHI, but then we've got the inconsistency applied on top of that.
So as a CISO, that sounds like a lot. Just to keep track of and to monitor and manage. So as a CISO, do you have any like tips on how you're doing it or how you can do it better for our listeners?
I do. So like everything in infosec, it comes down to prioritization, because I think we can all agree that you quickly learn as a CISO, you just can't fix everything. You're probably not aware of everything, and you can't fix it even if you were aware of it. You can't fix it all, as much as we would like to. So it really boils down to how do we actually prioritize tackling the management of NHIs. So at this point, allow me to veer into IAM for a second, Jess,
Please.
because I'd really like to explain to you to the listeners the four-tier model I use for application maturity and tie that back to NHIs. So proof, I use a four-tier model to represent the maturity of our applications, whether that be SaaS or things we've built internally. Tier one is what I'll call the unknown unknowns, essentially shadow IT. And like many companies, we have some tooling to attempt to identify app usage that falls in this category. Tier two is what I would call known but unmanaged. These are the applications in your company that everyone knows you use. Maybe cross-functionally, you have a whole bunch of folks using the application, but inexplicably are not centrally managed, perhaps no SSO. And apps in this category often have unclear ownership, or perhaps kind of shared ownership. And as we know, if everyone owns something, no one owns something when it comes to IT. Tier three is what I would call managed but not optimized. So these are applications that are centrally managed, at least from an IAM perspective. So, for example, SSO is enabled. But what I mean by not optimized is there hasn't been explicit work to perhaps validate the IAM configuration. Does the app still support username and password login in addition to SSO, for example? Are the associated NHIs, are they current? Are they still in use? Are they scoped down to the minimum set of permissions? Probably not. The app's in your IDP, it's in Okta, for example, but no one's taken that extra step to review that configuration. So lastly, that brings us to tier four, what I call managed and optimized. And this is applications that are not only centrally managed, but also go through a periodic IAM configuration review. And as part of this, we look at NHIs and we ask, are all of these still required? Do they adhere to our policies around rotation? Are they scoped appropriately? And we constantly do cleanup work. This is not a one-time exercise. We'll revisit and carry out this audit. And to be honest, I don't know too many companies that do these kind of IAM configuration audits, but I consider them as important as your standard kind of access review, which we all do. And so, tying that back into NHIs, it's perhaps infeasible for most organizations to do that tier four kind of audit on every application they own. And so every CISO should figure out, well, what are the most critical applications? And those are the ones you really want to work to getting into tier four. And then you want to then take a look at the NHIs as part of that.
So that's here. I thank you for elaborating and describing that. I think it's great. It was just kind of giving me, reminded me of like CMMI model two a little bit with the
Right.
tier four
Yes.
optimization. Did
Yep.
you like put that together yourself or did you get that from a publication?
I did put that together myself, but you're right. It's inspired by a bunch of kind of maturity models out there. So I'm sure a lot of your listeners have something similar. Really, as CISOs, we just need the tools to be able to prioritize. And we have a rubric internally for helping us determine what makes an app critical. Of course, it's heavily related to the data, the type of data and the volume of data that an app handles, but it's not exclusively related to that. We also look at, well, what are the capabilities of the application? Could the application act as a conduit for lateral movement, for example, if it was compromised? If you take an EDR application like CrowdStrike that potentially can run code on systems that it's installed on, a lot of EDRs support that for analysts to log in and carry out sort of quarantine operations. Then those applications have to be viewed as critical as well. So we've got this set of critical applications. We're constantly kind of reviewing the rubric and asking ourselves, like, is this appropriate? Is this generating the right set of critical applications? And then we are going really deep into these critical applications to understand how they're configured, and as part of that, a deep review of NHIs.
Excellent. I really like you said, I'm gonna have to steal this. You said if everyone has access that or everyone owns it, nobody owns it. And yeah, I love that. And you also mentioned, the when you're talking about your categories, the NHS that's used for engineers, it might have been forgotten about. So, a lot of these things, some people would consider basic cybersecurity, right? We know what we have in our environment, we monitor, we manage, we review. That's like the thing to do, right? But it's so easy to kind of forget about those non-human identities because if they don't have an owner, and I see that a lot. We have abandoned Active Directory accounts with, a lot of privileges. So, I mean, if we have that, and that was supposed to be belonging to someone, right? So the NHS, I do feel like, I'm sorry, NHI, I do feel like those are often overlooked and abandoned, and maybe not part of that review process. Just curious, did you always have this approach? Or did you work for a company or were you working on a project where you realized like, wow, these non-human identities aren't part of the review process as they should be?
Yeah, I developed this approach over time. Just this idea of number one, identifying critical applications. In my last role, that my company was a lot larger than Proof is today, and had offices in multiple countries, and had I think undertaken something like 20 or so integrations, acquisitions rather. So you can imagine the state of things from that. So there was this real need to develop tools to prioritize and to do things consistently, so that if two people prioritized the same set of systems, we'd end up with the same set of results. So developing a rubric. So really encourage everyone that doesn't already have such a thing to work on it, and doesn't have to be perfect. You can iterate on it over time and improve it gradually, but you really want consistency. And then, as part of that, defining exactly what makes up the configuration review. So we'll check things like, obviously, NHIs, as we mentioned, but we'll also check what IDPs are configured in the application. There should be one and only one. If there's more, then what is that? Is that an old IDP, for example? And we'll check whether an application still allows username and password login. We'll check all contact information is all up to date in the application. All of these kind of things. And something you just said, Jess, you said it's really around the basics. 100% agree with that. I mean, so much of cybersecurity is around doing the basics. And I think that's almost become a trope. We hear that all the time, right? Just focus on the basics. Well, yes, we absolutely should do that, but we also have to acknowledge that in most companies, it's hard. It's really hard to be able to say hand on heart that we're doing the basics well, like across the whole company consistently all the time.
I agree. Ah, that's a trigger moment. Yes, basics are hard. Um, Yeah, for your tier four is managed and optimized. And you mentioned like your rubric and identifying critical. Uh, do you do you do that differently for non-human identities than human identities, or is it the same? You're just making sure they're included.
Well, we have a checklist of things that we'll go through with the NHIs for critical applications. But a lot of it really depends, as I mentioned earlier, on what the application's capabilities are. So in some cases, we're hamstrung. Let's say the application doesn't support scoped tokens, for example. There's no option but to generate long-lived highly privileged API keys. So in some cases, it is what it is. But in other cases, it's a good opportunity to be able to identify improvements you can make. So let's take GitHub for example. GitHub supports what they call classic access tokens, personal access tokens, and then it also supports the newer fine-grained access tokens. And between you and me, engineers hate fine-grained access tokens because it's a real pain to figure out exactly what scopes they need, and it's way faster to come in and just generate a classic access token and you know it will work, right? So it's an opportunity with an application like GitHub to determine, okay, where's our risk threshold, and do we want to allow folks, number one, to generate personal access tokens at all? You can lock that down in GitHub. You can set it so it requires approval. And then number two, do we still support classic access tokens, or do we block that entirely and go force engineers to use fine-grained access tokens? So these are the conversations that I want to be having. I want to be having with our engineers and our DevOps folks. But the prerequisite for that is understanding the capabilities that the application even provides.
So, just to dig in that a little deeper, and I'm not a GitHub user or expert by any means, but I know it's critical for a lot of organizations. A lot of organizations use it. I mean, we use it too. Um, So when you're having those conversations about the classic or the fine grain or what tokens should be used, is it based on the criticality of the system? Like is that part of your rubric? Like talk to me like you're talking to me. I have an application. I have an application that runs the traffic lights or something, and it's in
Yeah.
GitHub. Well, just curious, maybe put it in context for our listeners. Like, how would you have that conversation with me as a developer?
I mean, we would discuss and understand, reach a shared agreement on what the criticality of the application is, right? I think sort of empathy towards engineers and engineers having empathy towards infosec people, it goes a long way. Like we have a conversation where we agree on what the criticality is, and then once we've agreed on that, yes, this is truly critical, then those conversations, then we have policy, right? Then we have a well-defined set of rules that the engineer can go read and perhaps grumble about, but you can at least have something that is sort of consistent that you can point folks to, documented and consistent, right? So we have all of that in place, and then essentially it's enforcement. Sometimes we have to make the hard decisions and configure systems in a particular way given the criticality, and that's just life. At Proof, I like to say that we are, on the one hand, we're like a startup. We're innovating really fast, bringing out new products to market. On the other hand, given some of the customers we service and some of the markets we're in, we need to have very clear, very well-defined, robust processes for things. And so, part of my role is threading the needle to allow innovation at the speed of a startup, almost sort of like existential urgency in things that we do. But I'm sure I got that phrase from our CEO. But on the other hand, it's my responsibility to ensure that we are adequately protecting our data and our intellectual property. So it's about trying to find that balance and having the rubric to help decide what's critical and what's not allows you to then define the rules, and we refer to application criticality in a lot of our standards and policies.
Yeah, I love that too. I love that you said empathy. I think that's so important. And just the fact that you said you have that conversation, security sometimes thought of as the no police, or we're hindering business processes or business period from being executed. And that's not true. So I love that you mentioned empathy, working with the engineers, working with various people, as I'm sure you do as a CISO, to be able to secure our data and also understand the criticality. Because that's certainly not your decision, right? You rely on the business owners and the developers and engineers and all those folks to help you understand that. Do you guys, just curious, do you use like the FIPS 199, or do you use like a publication for your rubrics or to help define that criticality?
We don't use one particular publication. We refer to a few. It's more of a sort of homegrown effort, and honestly, it's we're trying to keep it fairly light and fairly fast to evaluate things. And like I said, it's we're iterating on it as well. I think I certainly when I started this proof, we wanted to get something out the door that we would use, that we would have make use to make consistent decisions, and we acknowledged probably weren't going to nail it perfectly the first time, but that's okay. I think just being able to have something and iterate on it is a great start.
Yeah, for sure. I love that. And your mention of startups and existential growth or existential success, that's such a great word. I'm enamored by the startup world. I was in Cali a few weeks ago, and excuse me, and our last guest for last month was he's an angel investor for startups too. So I just can't imagine the pressure that you have and all the work that you have to do, or just, things changing very quickly. And I imagine that, with the rise of AI and the changes there, non-human identities are increasing. And as a startup, I'm sure that you're embracing that technology. John, would you mind closing us out with what your predictions are or what you see in the future when it comes to non-human identities?
Absolutely, I think you touched on it just a few seconds ago, Jess. The way things are going, agentic AI, we need to power the AI with provide the AI with privileges to interact with a whole host of systems. So we're only going to have more NHIs. I know there's a whole bunch of proposed standards around authenticating NHIs, but I think for the time being, I think the next few years are going to be really interesting. We're going to have a proliferation of NHIs, and that's just going to be one of sort of many new challenges that we face because of AI. But don't get me wrong, I'm a huge proponent of AI. We really try to use it as much as we can in our daily operations, and for smaller teams, it's transformational in many ways. So I'm a huge advocate for it, but I think it's going to raise some really interesting challenges. Other than that, I'd say my predictions are going to be unfortunately a little boring, and say like we're going to see a lot more of what we've seen this year.
I love that. Proliferate. You got some good. I like your vocabulary. That's nice. Um, I like to ask all my guests this question. John Heasman, you've been an awesome guest. Just curious what you would tell 18-year-old John. What advice would you give him?
That is a really great question. You know, aged 18, I was interested in technology and cybersecurity. I thought I wanted to become an engineer, a real engineer, somebody that built bridges or something like that. But I followed my passion, which was information security. And so I'd say if you're age 18, if you're lucky enough to have a passion, follow it.
That's pretty great advice. I love that. You're a cool guy. I like you. Come out to my B-sides Harrisburg. I'm gonna have you talk.
Absolutely.
We're gonna hang out. This has been such a pleasure, John. Thank you so much for your time today and drop. You said you dropped so many gems, the core or categories for breaking down non-human identities, prioritization for CISOs, your tiered approach, which was really great. Please, everybody, save this video, podcast, and use it. I love that you have embraced a lot of different pubs and a lot of different, guidelines and frameworks that are out there and tailored it to your organization. And I think that's what they're for, right? So I love that you did that and you didn't just adopt it. And you sound like you got it going on over there. You sound like a cool guy, cool boss. So shout out to everybody that's working with you too. And thank you, John. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening. I hope you're taking notes. You can always rewind. See you next time on CISO Stories podcast. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in for this month's episode of the CISO Stories podcast. We want to say a special thank you to this month's sponsor, Savient. Get a free identity security demo at CISOstoriesPodcast.com/Savient. Please subscribe to the CISO Stories podcast and you'll receive a new episode on the second Monday of each month.